Well, I usually come down and we usually participate in the sermon together, but I can't afford to get long-winded. We have a lot happening today. So you're going to get one straight from the script. How's that? Sorry, you can't talk back today. I am wearing my wonderful stole that you presented to me, though, in February at the anniversary of my 20th ordination. So this is my first chance to wear it. So we are in the ordinary time, which is the color of green. So friends, I ask you, have you ever felt as if people were watching your every move? Have you ever been in that position? Well, Jesus is today in the scripture. First, he's in a grain field, and and then he's in a temple. And at both times, there are Pharisees nearby. And they're watching his every move. And of course, they have a comment for it. They have a comment. You've heard the old advice that says, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say it. Exactly. You know it. I'm sorry to report that according to Mark, the Pharisees did not follow that rule. But if you look back on what they were, I would like to tell you that the Pharisees were actually more of a people's group. They believed in not allowing the rules to rule over the people, but the people to rule over the rules. They wanted the common folk to be led with less strict and less literal means. It was the Sadducees who were more literal and far more damaging of Jesus' ministry. So we perhaps at times read wrong things into the words and into their intentions. And so I think, actually, when the Pharisees said, isn't this unlawful to do this? I think they were lofting Jesus a softball question. I think it was a simple one. When they were feeding him a few lines that he could hit out of the park, to mix a few metaphors there. So in one part, Jesus says, stretch out your hand. And Jesus spoke this to the man whose hand had withered. And in the acting out of stretching his hand, that man either invoked his faith or his hope. I suppose it really didn't matter all that much because according to the story, the hand was restored. I wonder what would have happened if the man did not stretch out his hand. Would Jesus have healed him nonetheless without the man's compliance? I'd like to think so. Maybe the stretching out of the hand was more for dramatic effect, as if a restored, withered hand wasn't dramatic enough. So back to those Pharisees. They were reported to have asked Jesus why he was working on the Sabbath. Plucking grain would have been an act of work. In other words, why was he breaking the Jewish law, which declared that nothing but family and prayer time was supposed to be happening on the Sabbath? That which would have been like sundown Friday night till sundown Saturday night. And Jesus had a ready answer. He referred to a story about King David, who was always and till this day is considered the greatest king of Israel. It was it was pretty hideous, actually. David entered the temple and he stole the ceremonial food that was on the altar and had been left for the priests to eat. It was sort of like if a police officer were to march into our service right now and steal the communion bread, okay, because he was hungry. All right, that's what happened. David was hungry and in need, so he ate where he knew he could find an abundant supply. So Jesus was setting an example, one which I believe the Pharisees would back. That the Sabbath was a good idea. But when it restricted a person doing something meant to help them, it wasn't such a good idea. Just because it was a law, if it was bad for the person, maybe it was a good thing to break it. Then in the second half of the story, another softball was pitched to Jesus, one which according to my sensibility makes all the sense in the world. If he could help heal, and it was the Sabbath, so be it. He would heal. He saw the man in need and he acted. It reminds me of a somewhat humorous situation that I heard about a month ago when I was in Costa Rica. My friend was telling me that ambulances in Costa Rica often carry more than one person. They'll make several stops on the way to the hospital. Yeah. And oftentimes, the people in the ambulance have far different needs and far different urgency to get to the hospital. So my friend had a friend who was in the ambulance. They were injured, but it wasn't a terrible, life-threatening injury. They had to get to the hospital, though, right? And there was someone else, though, that they picked up. This person had been in a car wreck, and they had a terrible injury. Terrible, severe injury. The problem was that as they traveled 2 hours to the nearest hospital, it came dinner time, and the driver stopped for dinner and invited them in to have dinner with him. And that's what they did. Exactly. I think he went a little too far with his dinner rules. Stretch out your hand. Whether it was a dramatic act or not, there was a desire expressed by this man with the withered hand to get well. And our scripture suggests that though the Pharisees act, if it was lawful to heal on the Sabbath when all work had been restricted, Jesus set a different standard by not just advocating for a new law. He didn't say, I want to change the law. What he did was that he did a new law. He acted and he did differently. The man with the withered hand would have known better also, but he too was just as guilty as Jesus because he let Jesus break the law. So he was a great actor in his own right, an actor for justice. I think God will break the law for you, my friends. I believe God will break the law if only you stretch out your hand. You can be a co-conspirator with God. How's that? You've heard of co-conspirators. You can be one too. You can break the laws, perhaps, of the universe when you stretch out your hand in hope or in need or in love. So may your need overwhelm your compliance to the law or your compliance to your own sense of what is possible in this world. Not what is impossible, but what is possible. Know that God is with you on your path to wholeness and peace. This is our God of strength and justice. Thanks be to God. My friends, may the Lord be with you. Let us